Welcome back to our channel. Today we're testing the new Storm Summit Peak. If you like what we do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Patreon. First impressions, Storm releases another medium shiny defined ball. Is it a surprise? Alright, well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but Storm does make a lot of these type of balls, that clean and angular shape. Obviously, it owes to Storm products really having a kind of a little grasp on the chemistry of that resin that creates a reaction that allows it to push an oil and respond fairly quickly to dry. I would say, that skid flip or, clean angular reaction is not always the best one, but it's certainly one bowlers enjoy seeing. We did resurface the Summit Peak with the from that reactor gloss as usual. You can check out that video on that process. I'll start by saying the Summit Peak does have a nice shape. The biggest thing is what I would say the matchup to this pattern and lanes made it a touch sensitive. So we did see some over-under. Great shots sometimes came in behind the head pin, leaving corners, and there's really a limit to squaring up due to the strong friction response. So the bottom line is that the Summit Peak was pretty touchy for me on this house pattern, on these new lane beds. I tested on fresh just after using the absolute power to try to take the edge off the pattern a little bit, but honestly, it wasn't enough. The pattern needed to break down further before this ball would be more usable. I'd say even with a low RG and high diff, the ball doesn't quite feel strong enough to be square in the mid-defined category like the recent Sublime we tested from 900 Global, but it's probably a touch stronger than mid-late. The best place to play this pattern was honestly way out to 5 or even further out at the breakpoint, which helps blend the reaction with the friction. The quick look here at the 900 Global Sublime, just for reference, and you could see how defined of a move it makes with still a heavy roll, and that's just really because it gets into the roll sooner than the Summit Peak, which still makes a strong move, but a little stronger. Now for Tyler, as you would expect, his basic track on the house shot is about an arrow deeper than mine, so that's puts him somewhere between the third and fourth arrow. He really did like the shape of the Summit Peak. It had the length, that rounded boom. The big thing was the Summit Peak was, I don't know what to say, like 50-50, whatever, in terms of carry due to it just going a foot or two too long. To our eyes, the shape did look very nice, but it was a little frustrating to leave the corner pins on pretty good shots. Squaring up, again, wasn't really the answer because it simply would respond to friction too hard. So it really just says the ball asks for a bit more breakdown or a slightly shorter pattern. So this pattern, we believe, is 42 feet. So if it was 40 foot, I'd probably, we'd probably see this ball working better out of the gate. As it needs a bit more friction, as I thought about it, I'm thinking about how to assess this ball. It kind of reminds me of the Sonic from several years ago. Same core shape, that centripetal, some version or other, but lower diff, but also with a weaker R2S cover. In the end, the stronger cover plus the stronger core of the Summit Peak doesn't really change the formula that much, to be honest. It does seem rounder and less sharp off the end of the friction, but close enough, to be honest. I thought, maybe we could be looking at something closer to a phase 3 replacement, but my initial assessment was that the Sublime is actually closer. And you can see here the Sublime is earlier and more ball overall than the Summit Peak. But wait until we chat a little bit about Brian's look. Alright, so let's see how Brian gets on with the Summit Peak. He's playing the most direct between the three testers, so he plays closer to the friction line, the house pattern that's somewhere around 6 to 8. With that said, the Summit Peak looks pretty angular. I believe the new lanes are playing a role here. He tried to use it on the same line as the absolute power we just tested, but the Peak overhooked off the dry. It's just quicker off the dry. He needed to make a 2-to-1 move left to find the pocket, and then he had a nice sweet spot with, and really enjoyed throwing the Summit Peak. When the ball can generate some angle and increase Brian's entry angle. His carry is going to increase. And I'd say his carry was a touch better than mine or Tyler's. The phase 3 was his mid-defined stall warper recently cracked, so he's been looking for a good replacement. In his eyes, the Summit Peak is a strong possibility. I know he kind of felt that way about the Sublime as well, so the question will be, when we get to different patterns, which will be more versatile. And you can see that on the same line, the Sublime is clearly earlier and more ball overall. Alright, so just to wrap up, here we go again. I'll finish where I started. Storm has the following shiny balls: the Absolute, the Journey, Virtual Energy Blackout, IQ Tour Ruby, Revenant, High Roads, and now the Summit Peak. Not to mention the Phase 5, I guess that recently went away. And that's not really even to mention on top of that, the Roto Grip and 900 Global lineup shiny balls. Of course, they're all slightly varied, but the Summit Peak slots itself, I'd say, probably below the Blackout, slightly above the Journey, maybe really close to the Revenant or replacement. All I would say is at least you have lots of options with slight different ball motions and, different shelf appeal to choose from.